We all know that wrestling can, at times, go wrong. Nobody can be perfect all the time, especially when you're dealing with something so complex with a lot of risks involved, with all the damage that it puts on people's bodies in general. This is something that as fans we are well aware of when we're watching. Hell, there's plenty of videos out there highlighting these moments, usually centred around more funnier flubs that don't necessarily result in people getting seriously hurt. This video here centres around a few examples of such flubs that highlight the risks involved, moments where you do wonder if such things were really worth doing. A couple of the examples we're going to see here aren't even really botches as such, they are moments that went off pretty much as intended, but still when you think about them, they are pretty wild. I have a six-pack of examples of some rather ridiculous pro wrestling bumps here, ones that I've been curious about over the years, especially when it comes to the stories behind them. There's plenty more out there of course, but these examples are all from bigger US promotions, specifically TNA, WCW and WWF/E. I should note that I'm trying to avoid the more obvious ones, and I also won't be covering anything that resulted in a very serious, career-ending injury. In all the examples shown, the person who ended up taking the bump was able to keep on wrestling, even if they may well have gotten hurt. Still, it goes without saying that some of these spots are probably going to make you wince a little. Anyway, let's get on with it. We begin with a man who's rather famous for ridiculous bumps, good old Jeff Hardy. Obviously when it comes to such things, you could easily fill a video with sick bumps entirely from Jeff alone. He has a ton of very nasty spots to his name, ones that make you wonder how on earth he's still wrestling today. The particular spot that we're covering here isn't actually one of his most notorious ones at all, perhaps because it's not a botched one in the slightest, but it is a spot that the man himself has called, in a recent interview with Chris Van Vliet, the scariest Swanton bomb of his entire career. For this we go to Jeff's first run in TNA, the mid-2000s, and a match he had at Bound for Glory in 2005, a four-way Monsters Ball against Abyss, Rhino and Sabu. The match itself ends up being a very entertaining spot fest from TNA's wilderness years where they were off regular television, but still generally producing some damn fine events, with four guys who you'll happily see doing this sort of thing. And the highlight is undoubtedly Jeff Hardy's swanton from the stage onto Abyss through a table. It's a spot that ends up looking amazing, but when you give it some thought, you can easily see why Jeff Hardy said that this was the moment, above every other wild thing he's done, that was the one that brought him closest to crapping his pants. Most of the wild Jeff Hardy spots usually end up being about falling from a great height, and that's undoubtedly a factor here, but this one is even more about distance. From where he is at the top of the stage, Jeff has to clear the whole of the raised platform that's part of the ramp in order to hit Abyss on the table, where there is of course not a lot in the way of padding aside from the aforementioned plank of wood and the monster himself. To overshoot it would obviously suck a great deal, but to undershoot it even slightly and hit that stage frankly doesn't bear thinking about. When Jeff was looking down from his vantage point, he thought to himself, shoot. This could be the end of your career. There's a little raised platform on the top of the stage that Jeff initially wasn't going to use, but when he was up there he naturally thought it would be gnarlier to get a couple of extra feet up, and this probably helped a little when it came to making that distance. James Mitchell screams at Jeff from the floor while also checking he's ready, to which Jeff gives a nod. He does it, and he makes it. It looks bloody great as Hardy absolutely splatters Abyss without a hitch. Without an injury. But hoo boy, it's a risky one that could have been a career ender or even worse if it had gone wrong. In the end, Jeff continues, not just to eventually lose this match via a Rhino driver from the second rope, nasty enough in itself that, but also to wrestle in a #1 contendership battle royal later on in the night, with the whole storyline resolving in Rhino beating Jeff Jarrett to win the TNA heavyweight title. Great pay-per-view, great story, great matches, and a particularly great bump here. But you do wonder about that massive risk involved, and if it was worth it. But of course, Jeff himself would say that, of course it bloody was. In the same interview with Van Vliet, he says that's what he loves, channeling Matt Hardy v1 by saying he lives for those moments when he's scared, but it all comes off great. As it is, the fact that this Swanton went off absolutely perfectly does put it up there with ye old charismatic Enigma's best moments, albeit one that is often slept on because of where and when it occurred.
Area, and Joe comes running across and Sting. You gotta be kidding me!
We stay in TNA for another big dive that did kind of come off, but it is not a spot that ends up looking amazing at all, and it is certainly one of the more ill-advised bumps that a wrestler, particularly someone who's as great as the guy we're talking about, has ever taken. We're at Bound for Glory 2008, and it's Samoa Joe versus Sting. Yes, it's the Stair Dive. Of course it's the bloody Stair Dive. This is the main event of the night, of course, the big match of what is normally TNA's flagship pay-per-view, with TNA champ Joe putting his title on the line against a guy who was already a legend. So naturally you should expect some pretty huge moments, and generally speaking Joe and Sting do not have a bad match here. Still, the only thing that people really remember from this match now is the Stair Dive. It all starts with the pair fighting in the crowd, of course, gradually making their way up the stairs while the referee, old Mr. You Damn Right I Did It t-shirt himself, Earl Hebner, tries vainly to get these two back to the ring. Joe eventually secures some distance between himself and a stunned Sting, makes his way to the top of the stairs, takes a run up and hits a dropkick. The foot connects with Sting, but Joe himself crashes flat back onto those concrete steps and, particularly in the replay, it looks utterly gruesome. That and, well, it doesn't exactly look like the best move. The contact could be described as not quite getting all of it, and like a lot of dropkicks to the outside, it looks more like something that hurts the person giving the move a lot more than the person taking it, only amplified because it's onto fricking concrete stairs and, surely, in the watcher's eyes, there's no way at all to take a bump like this onto stairs and for the bumper not to eat an elephant-sized hunk of shit doing it. Not ideal, and not really the best moment of this match, which continued on fine from here and resulted in Sting winning the TNA title from Joe. Over the years, this particular stair dive did end up becoming one of the biggest moments in Joe's TNA years, even if it was all for the wrong reasons. It's right after this match and his loss of the title where Joe does slowly start making his way down the card. We get the face paint, the Nation of Violence, being a part of various bad storylines, and not a whole lot in the way of impressive matches. Now, not to say that this is in any way the fault of Joe himself, it's just something that happens with TNA in general at this time, especially once Hogan and Bischoff take over in 2010. In the case of Joe, however, a lot of the blame gets put on the stair dive. Rumour gradually spreads over the years that it resulted in great injury, possibly even breaking his tailbone on the move, resulting in Joe changing his whole style completely and becoming more of a rather generic big guy. The stair dive itself being almost wholly blamed for why Joe's matches from 2009 until the end of his TNA run in 2015 weren't as good as his bouts from 2005 to 2008. This wasn't really refuted by Joe himself until 2021, when he addressed the dive in a series of tweets. He didn't miss any time whatsoever from the stair dive, and to be honest, when you actually look at its aftermath, it doesn't really look like Joe did himself a whole lot of damage in the end. Adrenaline aside, you kind of imagine that if he'd done something like break his frickin' tailbone from the move, it'd show a lot more. The move, unsurprisingly, didn't quite go off as intended. Joe was supposed to hit a flying forearm onto Sting, a much more regular Joe move, but due to the distance being a little too far and the crowd being a bit too wild and close in, the move basically ended up changing in mid-air to a dropkick. In the series of tweets, Joe said that he'd enjoyed watching the legend of the stair dive grow over the years, and that he didn't bother to correct co-workers if they mentioned it, and said, "Wow, that sure changed your career, didn't it?" Reasoning that it wasn't worth correcting them if they didn't have the courtesy to actually ask him about it, and instead made assumptions based on rumours they'd heard. It is not uncommon to see such rumours spread, especially these days when you see a move on social media complete with a total bullshit explanation. Let's say, for example, the viral video where Will Ospreay hits some elbows on Mad Kurt in a 2022 Rev Pro match and is presented as if Will was going off script, which of course he was not. And so it's always important to, as in the case of this particular dive, to try and find the real story behind it, rather than blindly believing whatever crap spewed on social media and the like. Still a ridiculous spot, mind you.
Unbelievable! Has he got a jump, Tony? He jumped! He caught Hogan!
Probably one of the more infamous legit injuries in a big company from the last couple of years was from AEW Double or Nothing in 2024, when the 50-year-old Adam Copeland jumped from a cage onto Malachi Black. With Malachi prone on a table and covered in barbed wire, Copeland tried to do an elbow drop in such a way that would protect his opponent as much as possible, but in doing so he fractured his tibia, putting him on the shelf for 6 months, and a lot of people did wonder why on earth the old rated R superstar was trying to pull off moves like this one at his age and with his own injury history. Still, it's hardly the first time such a thing's happened with such a big star who's got enough wear and tear on them that they really shouldn't be doing a spot this wild at this stage in their career. So let's go to Halloween Havoc 97, WCW time, and a non-title match between champion Hollywood Hulk Hogan and Rowdy Roddy Piper inside of a steel cage. A dreadful bout that often gets dubbed Age in the Cage. Neither of these two were the ones who would take the biggest bump, mind. That would be Macho Man Randy Savage. For late period Savage, this show is definitely one of his best nights. The card is undoubtedly best remembered for the incredible hair versus mask match that Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio Jr. had, one of the best matches on any pay-per-view ever, but in the semi-main, Macho Man had a fabulous match, one of his last really great ones, with Diamond Dallas Page, a feud that played a big part in pushing DDP to the main event. And right after this, being that he was part of the NWO, he ends up interfering in this, well, not so good cage match. It should be said that you would worry about any of these three climbing up this cage in particular. As the reports say, the cage for this event was considerably taller than the standard size 8 foot or so high cage that was usually used for this sort of match. The Observer at the time says that this cage was legitimately 20 feet high. And the 45-year-old Macho Man Randy Savage, who was already suffering from significant knee problems at this stage of his career, is going to do a frickin' double axe handle off of this cage. There's no table or anything, just Hogan holding Roddy, who is then going to move out of the way so that Macho hits Hollywood. Not surprisingly perhaps, the move goes awfully. As high as this cage is, it is still an old style one. There's not the sort of space on the top that, say, Adam Copeland had to jump off when he got injured. It's just a bar that Savage is precariously balanced on, and you can see just how much it warps when Savage goes to jump off of it. It's incredibly rickety. Between this and Piper moving away, the spot falls way short. While Hogan often gets blamed here for not catching Randy, he doesn't have any time to move with Piper coming off of him, and it's clear that Macho simply doesn't get anywhere near enough distance, likely not able to push off enough from that frickin' cage, and in the end only just hitting Hogan with his outstretched arm. It should be said as well that the cage is actually pretty far from the ring itself, especially from where Savage is jumping from. There's plenty of space for the wrestlers to move around on the outside and even go out of the cage. You know, despite this being a cage match and everything, but let's not get into that. With this in mind, and the cage being so flimsy, it's a good thing Randy actually managed to get as much distance as he did. He could have hit the ropes, or the corner post, and this would have been much worse. This is not a spot that went well in any way whatsoever, and you really do wonder how Macho's knees didn't just flat out turn into dust on impact here, especially with him then getting thrown over the top rope straight after. As it was, he continued his participation in the whole cluster schmuzz even after this wild spot. While Savage didn't have all that much time off after this spot, it can't have helped much with the already bad condition of his knees, especially when you consider that just a few months after this, while winning the WCW title for a third time against Sting at April 98's Spring Stampede, he tore his ACL. In typically thoroughly inadvisable yet very old school style, he still wrestled on for a couple of months even after doing that, before finally getting knee surgeries and spending almost a year on the shelf. When Macho Man came back from that in April of 1999, he was never really the same. There are rumours, although I can't find a lot in the way of confirmation, even on stuff like 83 Weeks, that the whole Age in the Cage debacle, complete with the outrageous Savage bump, was set up as something of a response to the first Hell in a Cell match in WWF between Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, which had occurred a couple of weeks beforehand and featured some pretty wild spots of its own. Now, while I can't find confirmation, I do buy this considering that the cage was higher than usual and that there was space between the ring and the cage for Hogan and Piper to brawl outside. Now, if that was the case, then, well, the combination of Hogan and Piper's terminally awful wrestling, the absolutely nonsensical and very confusing booking, and Randy Savage very nearly ending his career for very little reason, makes it about as good a response as Drake's retorts to Kendrick Lamar were. Deary me. Still, despite all this, the Randy Savage double axe handle isn't the stupidest thing to happen in this match. That honour goes to the fan climbing all the way up and into the frickin' ring at the very end of this disaster to get the proverbial 7 shades beaten out of him. You just don't get that sort of fan interaction anywhere else but late 90s WCW, do you? And yeah, the fan was a plant, but it's still funny.
Look at this! No! Oh no! He passes! That's an A+!
Let's stick with WCW. We're going later, right near the bitter end. Now honestly, I could just do a whole entry that's dedicated to WCW's dreadful hardcore division. It produced 0 matches of any worth, was awfully booked, and its main product seemed to be little except filling up the company's injury list. One particularly awful match, the Bash at the Beach 99 Junkyard Invitational, resulted in damn near every participant getting banged up, particularly the winner, Fit Finlay, who nearly lost his frickin' leg. But of all the many injuries associated with this god-awful division, there's none that quite make you wince more than the one suffered by poor old Johnny the Bull. And in true WCW fashion, it happened right in the pit zero of the company, on a random nitro, in a random match, with a random spot that really had no business just being chucked out there in a TV bout that nobody cared about. The setup here is that Johnny the Bull, or Johnny Stamboli, and Big Vito, the Mamalukes, have a little feud with Terry frickin' Funk. On the June 5th 2000 Nitro, the Mamalukes decided to attack Funk during his defence of the hardcore title, resulting in a new champ being crowned in the shape of, Eric Bischoff. Not great, is it? Eventually, Big Vito claimed the hardcore belt for himself after it was given to the Mamalukes by Bish, and here on a July 3rd Nitro, the team's already pretty much broken up. We actually have an amusing bit before the match where the Funker, who seems to have taken Johnny under his wing, tells the Bull that he's got to be ready for his opponent tonight, because he's a real tough guy. And then, when Johnny turns his back on Funk to get a garbage can, Terry blasts him with a chair because he is, of course, said opponent. Anywho, the match itself starts and progresses about as you'd expect. It's a WCW Nitro hardcore match. It's crap, in other words. Funker largely lays down a beating until Bull's able to sidekick a chair into his face. We go from there for a brief trip to the crowd, back to the outside, and Johnny sets the upcoming spot up with a snap suplex before positioning a chair neatly onto Terry's head. Johnny goes to the ring, makes a rope run and goes for a springboard, but he has to abandon it the first time, which feels like a bad omen. No matter. Johnny jumps right back up and executes a springboard leg drop onto the outside, smashing the chair right into Funk's face. Now, aside from the aborted first attempt, there's no botch as such here at all. The mark is totally hit, and the move looked good. However, for Johnny, things are now very bad. Very bad indeed. Why? Well, in doing this spot, he has just torn his bladder, strained his pelvis, and perhaps worst of all, He's torn his bloody urethra. Jesus, Mary and Joseph. It's no wonder that Johnny's hands go straight to his crotch after the spot. He's just turned his whole genital area into a crunched up bone heap. Johnny can barely move, but the bout still goes on for a couple of minutes. After all, he is actually booked to win the match, which he eventually does with a DDT on a chair. Funk shows him respect, the Bull's helped to the back, and he will spend a couple of months on the shelf thanks to this hideous injury. As with the Jeff Hardy spot at the start of the video, you weigh up the risk of these spots with how much it was worth it to entertain the crowd in this way, and in some cases you can definitely see why the likes of Jeff go for the big shots. In the case of this one though, of course it bloody wasn't worth it. It's a random frickin' Nitro in 2000, a completely unentertained crowd that barely reacts to it, the second match of the night. No, a springboard leg drop to the outside onto a chair was not worth it in the slightest. It should be said that while there are examples of WCW talent being pushed into aerial spots that they weren't comfortable with, Sid Vicious being by far the worst example, this was not one of them. According to Brian Alvarez's The Death of WCW, Johnny the Bull thought this up, and he wanted to do it because he thought it looked cool, despite a lot of people saying that he really shouldn't do it. The almighty Lance Storm, driest man in all of wrestling, remembers Johnny showing him the move on a crash pad and asking him if it looked cool. Lance replied that it did, wondering to himself how the hell Johnny would hide the crash pad if he did it live. It didn't occur to him that the Bull was intending to do this spot onto the frickin' floor. Johnny the Bull himself has talked about the spot on various podcasts, saying that he was young, he thought he was indestructible, and he was super excited to wrestle a legend like Terry Funk, and so that's why he thought up this wild spot. Although he does say that it might not have gone so horribly for him if he'd had a piss before the bout. Yes, his bladder was full. If it wasn't, it'd have still sucked, but, you know, he might not have torn the bastard. So let that be a lesson to you. Always make sure you go to the bogs before doing anything outside. You never know when you might rip your full bladder open and cover your bodily organs in urine. Be smart, be safe, and don't be like Johnny the Bull. Enough WCW. Let's get to some WWF action, specifically the early 1990s. Now this entry isn't just for one particular spot, it's for one move in general. A move that is ridiculous, needlessly dangerous, and after looking at it further, one that may well be my pick for the worst finisher in wrestling history. There's other moves from this period that are likelier to be picked for such an honour, the leg drop of doom, the shake, rattle and roll, the bushwhacker battering ram or whatever. Thing is, none of those moves appear to be purposefully made in order to hurt people, whereas the shaker height spike, as performed by the Beverly brothers, is another matter entirely. A tag team finisher that was only ever really done against enhancement talent, and almost never done in a way that was anything close to safe, and by all accounts it was responsible for at least a couple of nasty injuries. And when you look at it, well, how could it not have been? I should say that wrestlers taking liberties with the enhancement guys, the job guys or whatever, particularly from this era, is a bit of a bugbear for me. It absolutely stinks in damn near every example you can think of. It's the mark of a clearly insecure asshole if you feel the need to stiff the hell out of someone who's at the bottom of the pole and whose literal job is to make you look good. Someone who's not under any kind of contract, probably not being paid a hell of a lot, not really able to say no to any spot that's put their way if they want to work with the company again. The shaker height spike is the worst example for me because, as mentioned, it was only ever used against jobbers. It's a move where Blake Beverly kinda sort of back body drops a guy, and Bo Beverly grabs their head in midair and spikes it into the mat. And 9 times out of 10 it looks absolutely disgusting. Like, on the level of a Tiger Driver 91, only it's an absolute mess that just looks like a horrid botch. And this is a move for random squash matches featuring a generally miserable mid-card team that never came close to getting over. You almost sense the move was born out of frustration at that more than anything else, but that's not any kind of excuse for such a thing. So many guys had a horrible time with this one. Pete Christie and Bill Kobe are particularly awful examples from the archives, and it appears as though Kobe decided to call it a career not long afterwards. According to a relation of his shoulder was never quite the same after taking it. The genius, Lanny Poffo, the late great manager of the Beverlys, had plenty of misgivings about the move, which he explained on an episode of his Genius cast back in 2019. It's something that, if the Beverlys had asked 95% of the actual locker room to take, they'd be told in no uncertain terms to get stuffed. It doesn't look like they ever hit the spike on an actual peer. Who the hell would agree to take this move if they had a choice in the matter? Not to mention that with some guys, it'd be stupidly impractical anyway. What, you're going to do this move on, I don't know, Typhoon? Just a dreadful finisher in every regard. It even looks like a move you could perform in a safe way, something similar to a 3D, an assisted facebuster of a sort. But having seen a whole load of these spikes, that never seems to happen. The awful look of the move was clearly by design. If you want a more extended takedown of this move and just how terrible it is from someone who's been around and completely knows the ropes, I recommend checking out Stevie Richards' video all about the Shaker Height Spike and how god-awful a move it was. Now, I may not have ring experience like Stevie Richards has, but we both certainly come to the same conclusion. This move is bullshit.
Dudley thrown right out to the floor.
Now, happily, the majority of ridiculous moves can't be blamed on malice when they go wrong. They're things that unfortunately happen. After the fact though, people can have conflicting viewpoints on just how badly it went down and who or what's to blame or whatever. And that is perhaps the case with this rather winsome moment from an episode of WWE Raw on September 8, 2003. It's a 10-man tag bout featuring La Resistance, Rodney Mack and Mark Henry, against Hurricane, Rosie and the three Dudley boys, where the table spot on Spike Dudley goes a bit pear-shaped. It's fair to say that neither of the two main teams involved have particularly fond memories of this feud. Bubba Ray Dudley described La Resistance in 2021 as the shits, saying they were making the Dudleys look bad to the point where Bubba actually slapped Sylvain Grenier backstage after the young Quebecois had the temerity to complain about him working stiff. Whilst Rene Dupree has pretty openly described Bubba Ray as a bully who often intentionally hurt people in the ring, especially around this time, kicking people in the head when they were expecting to give a back body drop, and so on. The matches were pretty awful, of that there is no doubt. For the consensus opinion on the whole Dudley's La Resistance feud, please refer to the initials of the aforementioned Hurricane and Rosie tag team. Superheroes in training. The whole Dudley Boys La Resistance feud is indeed nowadays only really remembered for the big botch on Little Spike Dudley, because it certainly appears to be a very nasty one. This spot happens after the match, which, if anyone really cares, was won by the heel team after Henry hit the world's strongest slam on Bubba. La Resistance continue beating on the Dudleys, and a part of this sees them hit their finisher, a double spinebuster called the Bonsoir, on Spike Dudley. Only this one is going over the ropes and through a Chekhov's table that Bubba Ray had set up earlier in the bout. Or at least, that was the idea. Those damned French Canadians don't get Spike up high enough, he hits the ropes with his leg as on the way down, and falls short. Although, not totally. The back of his head hits the table, taking a chunk out of it. Ouch! Even by Spike Dudley standards, this looks nasty as hell. As soon as such a vicious head impact is involved, you do naturally wonder just how the guy walked away. In the immediate aftermath, referee Brian Hebner goes out to check if Spike's okay, and because the Grand Order of Wrestling must be followed, Chekhov's table does eventually get fully broken. Only it's Hurricane who goes for it, while Spike continues to sell. Importantly, selling was exactly what Spike was doing. This move didn't result in injury, and Spike missed no time. The most balanced account of the whole deal probably comes from Spike himself, really. He's talked about the botch a couple of times with both Chris Van Vliet and Maven. Spike reasons that he didn't want to stick his own legs up in the air because of how fake that would look, and yet they could have got him up high enough if they'd not lifted him up by his pants. But he stresses that Dupree and Grenier were both pretty young and green, which is true. Ironically, the part of the botch which looks like by far the worst thing is what Spike actually credits with it not going as bad as it could have, hitting the back of his head on the table. That hit, however slight it was enough to slow Spike's momentum a little bit from getting caught on the ropes. With Maven, he thinks that if he'd missed the table completely, he might have gotten a lot more messed up. However, he was fine. He said he didn't really feel that much at all from it. Now of course, this is Spike Dudley we're talking about here, a human lawn dart who takes his morning coffee while being launched into the crowd and not breaking a sweat, so other wrestlers' mileage may vary a little. On the Café de Rennie podcast, the reunited Dupree and Grenier said that the whole thing was Bubba's idea, and that they'd said they weren't hugely comfortable with doing it, but of course that didn't fly. Bubba's also blamed by them for setting up the table too far from the ring, and Larry's Estons, it must be said, have a big point here. As Renee has mentioned, there's another incident from the very next Raw that people don't really mention. Bubba Ray and Devon did the exact same spot, this time on Rob Conway, this time with 2 tables in play, and it went wrong in the exact same way. In fact, the impact to Rob Conway actually looks worse than the Spike Dudley impact, as more of his head cracks the table. So with all this in mind, it is pretty plain to see that over 20 years, there really isn't much love lost between the Dudleys, specifically Bubba Ray and La Resistance. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this little detailed look at some of the more unpleasant moments in wrestling. There's certainly room to do more videos like this in the future with other themes, whether it be the Indies or Japan or wherever, so look forward to that at some point. But until the next time, bye for now.